Hello and welcome everyone. I just wanted to give a brief update on a very important issue that I'm sure many of you will have seen in the news in recent weeks. Of course, this involves the subject of international students who are the subject of certain removal orders as a result of their admission to Canada on the basis of fraudulent acceptance letters. Let me start by saying to those who are genuine applicants who have been going through a period of uncertainty, we understand the toll that this process has taken on your mental health and the challenges that you're dealing with, and we want to provide a solution, and I'll have details in just a moment. Let me also say that we believe that there are significant aspects of fraud that certain bad actors have been using to take advantage of students, and to the extent that people are complicit in fraudulent schemes, of course they will bear the consequences under the Canadian law of their behaviour in those instances. But I do have important news to share, particularly for those genuine students who are the victims of fraud, to provide recourse in this particular instance. First, we are establishing a task force made up of senior officials of both IRCC and CBSA. This task force will be required to undertake a case-by-case analysis of every individual case that is the subject of a removal order on the basis of fraudulent letters of acceptance. In the interim, and this is particularly important for the students who find themselves in this situation, any pending removals will be halted in the interim, and there will be a temporary permission to stay over the course of this period of consideration. The task force will consider particular factors, including whether a person completed their study, including their level of knowledge of any fraudulent scheme that may have underpinned their application, and those who are found not to have had knowledge and who have been genuine applicants to the student program will be given permission to stay in Canada for a period of a few years so they can either complete their studies or potentially remain in Canada and work over the next few years. In the meantime, we also know that we have a long-term issue that we need to solve. We have been working over the past number of months to establish a stronger system to better detect fraud when it comes to letters of acceptance. We'll have more to say in the months ahead because it will take some significant reforms to ensure that we can protect in a more automated way the ability to verify the veracity of letters of acceptance that may have been issued. Let me conclude with the message that I began with. Those international students who are genuine applicants that came to Canada to study and were victimized by fraudsters will be given permission to remain in Canada. Those who were complicit in a fraudulent scheme will be held accountable for their actions and will bear the full consequences of Canadian law for their illicit behaviour in this particular instance. We need to do what we can to protect the ability of those innocent people to remain in Canada, and with the process that I've laid out for you today, we'll be able to do just that. I'm happy to take what questions you may have. So, sorry, it was a little bit quiet. You said who's going to serve on the task force? So it'll be senior officials from IRCC and CBSA, likely at the ADM level. We have a very good record of who is the subject of a removal order. CBSA will provide the names of the impacted individuals. IRCC will dig into the file to understand the specifics of an individual case. It's difficult to lay out with certainty the exact features that may be at issue on a given case because the facts vary from person to person. To the extent that a student, for example, came to Canada, completed their studies, or has records that demonstrate they did not, in fact, know about the fraud, all of the evidence will be considered. To the extent that there is evidence that someone came to Canada, for example, never undertook a period of study and immediately tried to start to work, or if there is specific evidence on their file indicating they had knowledge of a fraudulent scheme, that would obviously push the equation in the other direction. So the totality of the evidence will be considered by the senior officials at IRCC and CBSA to identify a path forward, and temporary permission to remain in Canada for a few years will be issued to those who demonstrate that they were actually taken advantage of rather than they were perpetuating fraud themselves.
Are you certain that no one's already fallen through the cracks and already been deported? I know some people were sent to be deported yesterday.
There were a few people who have been removed. Some others have left voluntarily. To the extent someone who has already left Canada can demonstrate that they too were victimized by the fraud, they will have access to the same remedies for those who are already here.
So I got, go ahead.
Par le passé, on a vu que les agents de l'IRCC évaluaient les dossiers des étudiants d'une mauvaise manière, avec un mauvais biais, souvent racial. Alors, comment est-ce que vous allez déterminer la façon agents de RCC et de CBSA vont déterminer si c'est un cas de fraude ou pas, sans biais du tout.
Sans quoi?
Like without prejudice.
OK. C'est important. C'est un nouveau processus. Et ce n'est pas juste parce que les personnes ont une feature dans le dossier, ce n'est pas conclusif dans la situation. I think I may be missing your question.
I was just asking you how your agents will determine whether they were fraud or not. On what criteria do you have specific rules, not on their own judgment, because we've seen that they were fraud in the past.
So there will be an opportunity for people taking part in the process to adduce whatever evidence we can identify to prove their case. To the extent that there is evidence that CBSA or IRCC has already identified that may indicate a particular case involves fraud, that evidence will be used. For what it's worth, we routinely seek to detect fraud, and there are thousands of cases that are refused every year on the basis of fraud in this country. To the extent that the files of certain individuals indicate there was knowledge, for example, that there was a fraudulent scheme that led to their admission to Canada, that will be factored in. There may be other circumstantial factors that could point to one direction or another. As I mentioned just a moment ago, if a person entered Canada on a study permit but never attended school and immediately started working, that would be a strong signal that their genuine intent was never to study in the first place. So we will look at all of the relevant factors, which may differ widely on a case-by-case basis, but it's very important that we don't take a blanket approach because the facts underlying each case vary extraordinarily between applicants in this present instance.
Okay, and will there be sanctions for the person
Who committed fraud?
No, not committed fraud, but the person who, I'm sorry, les personnes qui
L'agent?
Non.
OK. No, c'est OK. Essayez en français. C'est bon pour moi de pratiquer aussi.
Les personnes qui entraînent les étudiants dans la fraude.
Oh, the people who train? OK. Yes, OK. Merci. Le secrétaire parlementaire est excellent. Merci. So of course, so for bad actors, it will depend on the particular individual. But if you were admitted on the basis of fraud and you knowingly took part in that fraud, you will be removed from Canada. You are subject to the ordinary removal process that will be maintained through this process. It's the genuine applicants who did not knowingly take part in fraud that will be provided with the remedy. There are other bad actors, in addition to people who may have entered Canada knowingly on false pretenses. Those include people who may have facilitated the issuance of fraudulent letters. If those agents were in Canada, we have the ability to use the new College of Immigration Consultants to make sure that they're held accountable. To the extent that someone has committed a crime involving fraud, those consequences could also arise given the individual facts of a particular case. In this particular case, we have reason to believe that there were agents who are currently in a third country. IRCC does not have a criminal enforcement branch with the ability to extraterritorially implement Canada's criminal laws. That is something that we will have to work with partners on the global stage to ensure that the partners that rely on us to accept students continue to have enforcement mechanisms in their home countries. In the meantime, we also try to combat fraud not just through criminal enforcement processes, but by sharing good information with prospective applicants in different countries around the world. The International Student Program is an incredible benefit to Canada, but its reputation depends on us protecting the integrity of the process at the same time we welcome students.
And do you have any numbers of victims of fraud?
So I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the process that we just shared details of. The total number of students, I know it's been reported that there are 700. Our numbers are significantly lower than that at present. There are a few dozen people who have been subject to removal orders, but despite the fact that we receive many hundreds of thousands of study permit applications every year, we take every single one of them extremely seriously. For the several dozen people that are going through the process, and there may be over the course of the next few weeks, more that we become aware of who continue to make themselves or become aware themselves that they were admitted on the basis of false documentation, that will be given access to the same process. So right now we're dealing with dozens, not hundreds, of removal orders, but we will still take everyone extremely seriously.
So just a bunch of...
So I'll go here and come back.
Okay, so if you you're saying it's dozens. Is this a lot of pure over a few dozen people? Would we be correct in saying that, or some people are saying 700. We have Mr. Singh getting up trying to do an all-party motion at the end of QP, and now you're telling me it's just a few dozen. Is this bigger than it seems?
So just to be very careful, though we may not be dealing with 700 people facing a removal order, for the individuals implicated, their ability to be in and remain in Canada means everything to them. The significance for an individual who has been planning on building a new life for themselves, there is hardly anything more important to them in their own lives. And the mental health burden that they are wearing as a result of this process needs to be taken seriously. But to your question, although there may be only a few dozen currently facing removal orders, we have been conducting investigations internally over the past number of years. And the number of people who seek to abuse Canada's immigration program, including the international student program, will be in the thousands. So we need to make sure that we have a serious process that protects innocent people who apply genuinely come to Canada. At the same time, we ensure that those thousands of attempted applications that are refused for fraud receive a strong signal that they won't be welcome.
So
I'll go here and then I promise to go there and we'll come back.
So to prevent this in the future, are you putting more staff on it, or is it just an extra questionnaire? Like there has to be a way to prevent this in the future, but what sort of machinations are happening internally to make this happen?
Certainly, and we did just indulge me for a little bit of context so you can understand that where we've been and where we're going. In 2018, the department launched a new process to strengthen the verification of letters of acceptance, and where they had reason to believe that there was fraud amongst certain applications that fall within the hundreds of thousands we receive, we then had a process to reach out to individual colleges and universities to verify those letters. With many hundreds of thousands and an analog system, frankly, that existed in 2018, it wasn't possible or easy to do the same verification for every one of the many hundreds of thousands of applications. Going forward, we're developing new tools, digital tools, that are going to allow us more seamlessly to work with colleges and universities, but we have a little bit of more work to do. We actually just finished a consultation not much more than a week ago on the international student program, and we're going to have a series of reforms that stem from that consultation process, including a strengthened verification process on letters of acceptance. That's actually been in the works for months, but we have some additional consultation to complete with the colleges and universities that will allow us to put this issue to bed going forward by more seamlessly addressing letters of acceptance right across the board with colleges and universities in this country.
3 months ago, the Prime Minister promised a regularization program for those without status. Could that be used here? Like, what's the status on that program? And these students now technically wouldn't have status since they are here on fraudulent documents. Will they use that type of avenue to work towards PR once you evaluate that they weren't in on the scam?
So I view these issues, although they are related in kind, that they touch on people who may or may not have status. These are separate issues that arise that require separate solutions. On the student side, the process that we've laid out today, given the fairly tightly identified circle of people we're dealing with, we can offer a tailored process that will give good solutions on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to people who are undocumented in this country, this is a much bigger challenge to solve, and policy work is ongoing. We're potentially dealing with hundreds of thousands of people who find themselves in this situation. Many have been here for 15 or 20 years. Many are working and making a meaningful contribution. We've had some real success, and we're trying to learn from the pilot programs we ran over the past few years, in particular the Guardian Angels program and the out-of-status construction workers pilot with the Canadian Labour Congress and the GTA and Hamilton areas. We're now looking to provide a more robust regularization framework that will provide a pathway to permanent residency, but we are examining different policy options before I have a big announcement to make on what that program will look like. But it's going to recognize that people who are here and making a contribution can't necessarily have access to public services, despite the fact that they have Canadian citizens who are as children. We will also be able to allow people to come out of the shadows and seek better economic opportunity for themselves at a time when their skills are significantly needed. Talk to Joe Mancinelli with LAUNA in the construction sector. He'll tell you he needs these people to help build houses for Canadians. They're doing it now, but they have to do it under the table because of their status. We want to solve that problem, but there is more policy work that's required to be done in the months ahead. I don't have a date for the formal announcement because we want to have the package fully developed before we take it public. But when that work is done, we will certainly be sharing in a very public way the path forward for undocumented workers in this country.
Students how many international students are here? How many international students are here fraudulently, on fraudulent documents?
Well,
You said hundreds of thousands are here undocumented.
Yep.
Do you know how many are here that are international students that came on fraudulent documents?
We don't have a specific number because we haven't completed all of these investigations. The total universe of people who may have been admitted would potentially be in a few hundred. But to be clear, a lot of the people who fall within that universe are likely people who were taken advantage of. So I don't want to suggest that all of those people are in fact here on fraudulent basis. The fraud may have benefited them, but many of those people could very well have genuinely intended to come and had no knowledge of the fraud that benefited their application. Okay.
How onerous is this process going to be for these students who bring them back? Do they have to hire lawyers? Is there going to be a large cost associated with this process?
I don't expect there will be. We want to make it as seamless and accessible as possible. I expect that we'll be able to do this over the period of the next few months, not many years. We want to have as streamlined a process as possible that expresses compassion towards people who genuinely applied to come to Canada. Of course, there are people who are also going through CBSA and the the IRB process that ordinarily leads to a person's removal, and some have even challenged the decisions of those bodies through judicial review. Those processes can be very cumbersome, can be very expensive. Our goal here is to offer a fast, fair, and final resolution for people who've been impacted in this particular scenario, and we want to reduce the burden on the individuals who are already bearing an enormous emotional burden as they go through this process. So in this particular case, the main cohort involves students who've come from India, but you have to understand that India is the top source of international students across the program. So it's not necessarily attributable to the fact that fraud is more rampant in India. Look, if we have data on the exact number of cases that may have been flagged for fraud by country, we can try to provide that to you. But in this present instance, the majority of those that we know have been admitted on the basis of false letters of acceptance have come from India, but that's just this cohort. We do expect that there are other related cases that may come from other countries, many of which have actually been caught and refused before people were admitted to Canada, but the bulk of the cohort that we're dealing with have come from India. OK, merci tout le monde, j'apprécie.